So next, it's with great pleasure that I'm going to hand over to the winners of the University of Cambridge Judge Business School MBA Digital Transformation Challenge. And the reason that I'm particularly pleased to do this is that I was actually lucky enough to share some of the insights from the Infrastructure Client Group's Digital Transformation Task Group at their very first session when they were actually set this challenge. So the challenge was to develop a use case very similar to Credo that uses emerging digital technologies and develops a collaboration and innovation ecosystem of relevant organisations to help a fictional city maximise its climate resilience. So now I'm going to hand over to Bob Mawaniki, Shruti Gupta, Tulika Kine, Giovanni Pasquali, and Stefano Cecchi. And this is actually the final part of your challenge. This is the real final part of your challenge because you've only got 12 minutes to present your winning idea on climate resilience of smart cities to heat waves.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for the introduction. That was very flattering. We are the Cambridge MBA team, and without further delay, because Melissa has already introduced us, let me just move into what we are doing today. So a quick overview of how we'll structure this. We'll talk about why heat waves, what is the actual strategy that we're employing, the digital technologies and use cases that we are suggesting, and we will wrap it up with the overall ecosystem that we are building to enable this strategy. So as we all know, and we're already experiencing it these days, heat waves are becoming much more frequent, much more longer and hotter. This is having an effect on the cities in terms of health, economy, rising energy bills. They are 25% more in 2020. Supply chain and logistics breakdown like rail buckling, crop destruction, and whatnot. And we see that this is affecting the whole globe. We may think that the hotter countries are in a worse off situation like Delhi experiencing 50 degrees centigrade right now, but their infrastructure breakdown problems are more due to development challenges than planning. However, if we see in the Western world, we look at London, which is a predominantly cold city, it's also experiencing more than 30 degrees centigrade temperatures, and there are unexpected infrastructure failures. The thing that is not there is the increased air conditioning loads, which we see much more accentuated when we move further to the west to say a cold city in US, where there is a domino effect of people behavior using more and more air conditioning and thereby exerting more pressure on the infrastructure grids. So the way we chose our fictional city is that it would be somewhere in the US, which is predominantly cold, with enough data availability, health outcomes, and product viability for the target persona. To then actually discuss the strategy, I will hand over to Bob.
All right. So just before we get into the strategy, a bit of background of what actually happens to the infrastructure of a city during a heat wave. So a heat wave can affect the city in two ways. One is direct. So just high heat means that a lot of the infrastructure is operating outside its predetermined temperatures. But also what happens is that it changes people's behavior, as simple as people stop going outside and using bikes and use more of their cars, which stresses the infrastructure more, and you sort of have domino effects. Another thing that could happen could just be outright failures. You have things like reduction of useful life. And of course, as with a lot of cities, you see direct negative outcomes for health. What you see when we looked at most of the US cities is that, next slide, please. You see that a lot of them are actually thinking about heat waves. They do have plans. However, a lot of the plans are sort of siloed. So the city council is doing its own thing. The health system is doing its own thing. The weather and climate people are doing their own thing. And we believe somewhere in between these lines, there is value to be added, essentially. And in our strategy, we had 4 key tenets that we wanted to make sure we had. So we have to figure out a way to capture this data. So the data, as I've shown, already exists in silos. Some of it is collected. Some of it we have to figure out new ways to collect it. a lot of this data actually comes in different forms and different timings and different formats, and there needs to be a way to standardize that, which we call the information processing. And of course, once that happens, we would need, depending on the use case, some sort of engine to figure out, all right, so this is the pieces of data that are necessary, and this is what's used for. And of course, all that needs to be governed in a way. Who owns the data? How do you monetize it? All that. So you need a governance framework. And before I hand it over, there's one key thing we should, we want to keep in mind. Why are we doing all this? So the next slide, please. We are doing this to help Stanford City do three things. One is to help them plan better because they actually know what's going on. Two is to help them track better because they, once you actually sort of break those barriers, you understand what the interdependencies are, and in the eventuality that something actually breaks, that you react faster. So I'm going to hand it over to Tulika to walk us through what exactly we mean.
Thank you, Bob. So, as Bob already mentioned, of siloed efforts being made by different organizations, there is also a problem, the kind of technology being used to plan a response for the heat wave. Currently, heat maps, weather model, climate map is being used. It's a very small subset of all the possible data that can be used to plan a resilience plan during the heat wave. So essentially, next slide, please. So essentially what we are saying that we want to integrate more diverse information into the existing ones, such as health data, supply chain data, personal device data, electricity, water, building occupancy data, put them into one place, which will be the information processing platform, churn it and get the insight using some of the latest technology to have a more collaborative and effective response plan during a heat wave. Next slide, please. So there are multiple technologies to do that. So a real-time granular data from the new touch points and the existing touch point can be collected using Internet of Things, 5G, satellite, drone, sensor, etc. That will put into a centralized information platform that will use some of the latest cloud-based platforms such as Microsoft Building Footprint or Microsoft Earth for AI, which are powered by big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence, geospatial analytics to bring out their insights, which will serve us in two ways. Number one is through a collaborative innovation platform, and second is the scenario testing. With respect to the innovation platform, it will help the different organizations and stakeholders to assess the public health risk and the energy implication during the heat wave to plan a more effective plan during that time. And the scenario testing will help the stakeholders to go back in time or in the future to see that how a change in a particular climate situation can impact the city. Now, this information will be very specific to use case, which Stefano will talk about.
Thanks, Tulika. So for heat waves in smart cities, we've spoken about the strategy that we'd like to employ, and we've also talked about some of the emerging technology we think that could be used. So we thought next we'd actually talk about some of these use cases for the fictitious city, Stanford City. These were bucketed into three key areas. One was health, the second was supply chain and more commercial applications, and the third was city planning. And you can see here some brief ideas under each area, and there's a lot that we could go into. The one that really jumped out to us was this health resilience area, and so we delved into that a little bit more. Next slide, please. When we were thinking about the use cases, we were thinking about actually, well, those are the use cases, but actually who could really be part of this ecosystem, part of this connected digital twin that we'd be developing. And we could think about these just three indicative persona. And one of the key things to notice here is this is a business-to-business innovation platform that we're suggesting, and that Robert could be one of the main users and one of the main stakeholders as the hospital manager to figure out, during a heat wave, where and how best to deploy their resources or his resources. So the specific use case, given the broader use cases that we could use, we went down into this specific one here, which is basically providing immediate live response for vulnerable people during heat waves. So the main reasoning for this is that actually heat waves cause deaths and fatalities, and most of these deaths actually occur in people who are above the age of 65. Interestingly, people who are well above 65 actually have access to smartphone and devices. And also the kind of overarching thing there is that there is a clear need here. So the design choices here we put in place, sort of leading from that kind of main driver, was to look at 4 key areas of data capture. So looking at things like location mapping, understanding where people are likely to be, demographic data, so understanding how old or in certain sort of aggregated format, like which locations in the city are likely to have sort of more vulnerable people. We can have the health status from the data, which could be privately held with hospital, and augmented heat maps. This could all be processed within the data, the sort of AI and sort of machine learning that could be done within the platform. And the final thing here is that the output could be the again mentioning there for many different stakeholders, but for our specific use case, you could, for example, imagine how ambulances are distributed better. Next slide, please. So we put together a very quick sort of prototype, and you can see here that there's this city map and there's an indicative city map there, and that we have the different layers of this map. So things like the day temperature, so the overall heat maps that we could overlay, and we'd also have things like the social vulnerability. And you can see here that it kind of provides prescriptive decision-making analysis help to people who are using the platform. And for the hospital manager, it would be like, let's deploy your people in this specific area. I'll now hand over to Gio, who will talk about the ecosystem broadly.
Thank you very much. So if you load this slide, yes. So at the center of our ecosystem, of course, there's the platform that is directly connected to a digital twin. The platform, yeah, if you keep loading, so you need to be clicking, yeah. The platform is directly connected with our stakeholders, which are then connected to the community, of course. We have no direct connection with as a B2C to the community. The electricity provider, the water provider, telco, transport authority, and healthcare feed in data on a regular basis. For the healthcare system, which was our example before, they would be precise and preemptive. So data on fragile people and their addresses, their location. In exchange, I get precise and preemptive health alerts, very similar to the one we just saw in the previous slide. That will enable them. No, sorry, can you? That would enable them to react towards people that are at risk. And of course, it will happen for all the other stakeholders for different use cases. Next. Now, how are we going to incentivize stakeholders to come on board? Well, we really want to leverage 2 principles in here. The first is we want to enable shared success. Everybody wins through collaboration, as you have seen before, but also, and most importantly, is orchestration without control. So no ownership of the data. You still own and control your data, which is quite tricky, but is doable. If we move to the next slide, we have looked at each of the potential stakeholders, the risk that we believe might arise, and they may ask about being part of this, and we develop potential solutions. For the sake of time, of course, it's not possible to go through them right now, but one important part would be a piloting to show a business case connected to it, and also have a number of exclusivity agreement as well as data coordination without ownership type of contracting. Yes. So when it comes to the business model, we didn't really have much time yet to think about this, but we had some initial ideas, and we think that the business model should follow a software as a service type of approach, where businesses, in this case, stakeholders, are charged on the volume of data accessed after an initial fee, but also on the quality of data, the type of data they want to access. And of course, there should be an important discount in not even free access, depending on how much data they are contributing to the system, which should therefore incentivize them to join. We also want it to be very modular. We want to be able to have a platform that is linkable to other existing platforms. An example would be the Credo type of approach, but there's a number of others that we identified that would actually probably allow us to fit in a modular way. Yes, thank you very much. That was it.
Well, that's brilliant. So you just passed that challenge as well. That's 12 minutes exactly. So well done to all of you, and congratulations again on the situation.